wissenschaftlicher Mitarbeiter am Institut für neuere Geschichte Serbiens, eben hier, wo wir gerade sind. Er ist gelernter und aktiver Historiker, hat hier an der Universität Belgrad studiert und auch dissertiert zur jugoslawischen Zwischenkriegszeit und Nationalismus in dieser Zeit. Er forscht seit langem zu nationalen Minderheiten in Jugoslawien mit einem uns sehr entgegenkommenden Fokus auf die deutschen Minderheiten. Zu seinen Filmpublikationen gehören unter anderem 3 Monographien, nämlich eine zu den Deutschen in der Vojvodina 2009, einer zeithistorischen Arbeit zum Nationalsozialismus und dem Verhältnis zu Jugoslawien, Zagreb 2007, und auf Deutsch erschienen ist Zwischen Hitler und Tito, das Verschwinden der Deutschen aus der Vojvodina, Belgrad 2005. Bitte schön.
The First World War brought about the downfall of 3 empires that controlled larger parts of East Central Europe for centuries. The fourth great empire, the Ottoman one, was ousted from most of its European possessions shortly before the first carnage in history on world scale. The defunct empire has left behind a patchwork of nationalities that was partly of their own making and partly preceded the empires themselves. Precisely these historical facts influenced the thinking of the new powers that be, who used them to legitimize their hold on power, demands for certain territories, the privileged position for one ethnic group over others, and to justify nationally biased policies in the decades after World War I, all in the attempt at creating some kind of majority that would underpin the new nations. These things were observable in several countries of East Central Europe, but this paper will try to depict and explain these phenomena and processes on the example of the kingdom of the Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, also known as Yugoslavia, even before the official change of the name in 1929. Yugoslav unification was a decades-long dream of part of South Slav intellectuals. The idea was born within the Habsburg Empire during the 1830s and 1840s, and was the expression of weakness of Croat and Slovene elites who were not able to make their national rights recognized by the so-called historical nationalities, the Germans and the Magyars, whose nobilities effectively ran the empire. It had its ups and downs depending on the political situation in the monarchy, mutual relations between the South Slav peoples, and outside political and intellectual influences. It certainly never possessed hearts and minds of all South Slav politicians and intellectuals, and even less of the masses. Even for those who adhere to it, it was a dream that could come true only in distant future. In 1914, it was difficult to foresee the breakup of the old Habsburg Empire. Even though Serbia declared liberation and unification of the South Slav brothers, her war aim, few people really believed in such a possibility. However, when the possibility did present itself, the Southern Slavs were quick to seize it, as did some other oppressed peoples and new or enlarged countries. They wanted to create a comparatively large nation-state that would be strong enough to grab and keep disputed territories from its neighbors and preserve its independence from encroachments of great powers. Although the leading Yugoslav peoples, called tribes, of one and the same people in German fashion, and for obvious propaganda reasons, were at odds with each other, their plans of territorial acquisitions, although not aimed at the same territories, ran alongside the same lines and could be termed maximalist. It was intended to take possession, with fair means or foul, of all territories inhabited by the Serbs, Croats or Slovenes, regardless of the ethnic majority on the spot. This modus operandi was tried already during the Balkan Wars when Serbia and Montenegro liberated from the Ottomans and annexed territories that more often than not had non-Serbian majority. This was justified with historical reasons. The territories in question used to belong to medieval Serbian state, which was proven by magnificent churches and monasteries, as well as by folk epic poetry that was already known in the West. These historical reasons were strengthened with more modern democratic and quasi-colonialist civilizing discourse, so dear to great European powers, as excuse for their own land grab. That the two Serbian states claimed they were bringing European civilization and democracy to the benighted locals, Serb and non-Serb, who had been held in Ottoman bondage for centuries. A well-disposed colonial power could be expected to accept these arguments attuned to Western ears. However, the territories of the former Habsburg Empire were usually more advanced than Serbia, so the liberating, civilizing catchphrases were hard to sell in that case. The demands for territories that had solid South Slav majority were not difficult to defend, especially when they had clear-cut historical borders, as was the case with Carniola, Croatia, Slavonia, or Bosnia-Herzegovina. The liberation slogan sounded plausible in those cases. The problem popped up when historical provinces that were at the same time economically more advanced were ethnically mixed and had centuries-old borders, such as historical Austrian provinces or South Hungarian counties. The worst case was the territory alongside the Adriatic coast. Although most of them, except for Istria and the city of Rijeka, had a solid Slav majority, large chunks of Eastern Adriatic had been promised to Italy. Romania was another problem, albeit thanks to her disgraceful military performance and separate peace, not such a big one. Even if her diplomatic clout was not strong as Italy's, she was able to demand the Banat with its very mixed population. Yugoslavia, for her part, did not covet the whole of the Banat, but wanted rather its eastern third, where mixed with Germans and Hungarians, more Serbs than Romanians lived, with the possible addition of the province's capital, Timișoara, coveted for its industry. The situation was somewhat the same in Bačka and Baranja. They had an ethnically mixed population, partly living in more or less compact blocks. The Yugoslav politicians stretched the borderline of the desired territory so as to comprise almost all Southern Slavs, regardless of their numerical superiority or inferiority in an area. This included the solid Hungarian town of Pécs with a magic mountain that were demanded on economic grounds. Yugoslavia allegedly needed a local coal. For her part, Hungary wanted to preserve its pre-war territory, even though in much of it ethnic Magyars were a minority. Austria was more modest, out of necessity. She demanded only the predominantly German-speaking territories. The main Yugoslav disputes in that section were the border in Carinthia and Lower Styria, especially the town of Maribor or Maribor. Yugoslav struggle for these territories took three basic forms. Firstly, military occupation. It was applied very successfully in southern Hungary, thanks to the Belgrade Armistice Treaty of November the 13th, 1918, that allowed the Serbian army to occupy southern Hungary. The treaty presupposes continued functioning of the Hungarian administration. However, within several months, the Serbian military authorities sacked most Hungarian officials and replaced them by South Slavs. Once the Great Popular Assembly, comprising almost exclusively Slavs, who made up a minority of the total population, voted for unification with Serbia on November 25th, 1918. The assembly was convened on order from Serbian Prime Minister Pasic. In areas where South Slavs were a distinct minority, sending petitions to the peace conference demanding unification with Yugoslavia was organized. Finally, the borders between Yugoslavia, Hungary and Romania were determined by the peace conference, leaving everybody more or less dissatisfied. In the north, Maribor was put under Yugoslav control thanks to the coup of Major Meister, whereas the resistance of the local Germans was finally broken down after bloody demonstrations in January 1919. In Carinthia, regular fighting between Yugoslav troops and Austrian volunteers brought about a stalemate that was eventually resolved through a referendum that went bad for the Slovenian nationalists because part of the Croatian Slovenes voted for the region state in Austria. Due to Italian military and diplomatic preponderance, the border of the Adriatic was much more to her than to Yugoslavia's liking. This was later on used by Croat nationalists to accuse the Serbs of not fighting hard enough for Croatian territories. Serbian and Montenegrin borders with Albania could not be disputed since it had been fixed and internationally recognized already before World War I. The problem was that the local Albanian minority that made up 2/3 of the Kosovo population and resented the return under Serbian rule didn't care much about international law or any law for that matter. At the same time, the Albanians were skillful with their rifles, so it took some 5 years before the Yugoslav government could establish its authority in the province. It was achieved through military pressure and bribing of Albanian leaders, but the events left bad blood to this day. In the run-up to the peace conference, arguments were assembled in order to justify Yugoslav claims to certain territories. They ran along the following lines. The Serbs, Croats and Slovenes made up the majority of population in territory at that point, or had made up majority in the past. Where majority status had been lost, it happened due to nefarious influence of foreign empires that settled down their own co-nationals, expelled the Slavs, or assimilated them. Thus, it was claimed that most of the German speakers in Slovenia were in fact Slovene renegades or foreign intruders. The same held true for most of the Magyars who were in fact of Slavic, German or Jewish origin. The Germans in the Vojvodina were pure diaspora, so they could not have a say anyway. A few Italians in Dalmatia were also converts. Particularly pesky were those individuals in Macedonia who claimed to be Bulgarians, or more rarely Macedonians, while being in fact nationally unconscious Serbs who fell under influence of Bulgarian propaganda. The existence of real Bulgarians in two easternmost counties acquired from Bulgaria after World War I was denied altogether. With a stroke of a pen, once the border was changed, they became Serbs overnight. Even though the invasion-assimilation theory did not influence the border drawing by the peace conference, it retained its value as justification of Yugoslav minority policy. In theory, the majority people in the new states were the Serbs, Croats, Slovenes. They were allegedly one people with 3 names. This was a poor ruse to hide before the world and the Yugoslavs themselves the undisputable fact that there were actually 3 leading peoples in the country and that no one had a majority. Indeed, additional minorities were hidden under the artificial majority, such as Slavic Muslims of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Sanjak, Novi Pazar and Macedonia, or Macedonian Slavs, who partly opted for Bulgarian, partly for Serbian ethnic affiliation, or simply had no notion about ethnicity whatsoever. There were also other hidden minorities, such as the Vlachs, Romanians in eastern Serbia, or Armenians scattered all over Macedonia, Kosovo and Serbia, who usually, out of opportunism, opted for the local ethnic majority. Thus conceived Yugoslavs and their auxiliaries, such as the Armenians or Vlachs, did make up the majority of the new state, as opposed to the situation in former empires. But although the official theory lumped all Southern Slavs together and regarded them as one, it did not prevent ethnic strife throughout the interwar period. Disunited among themselves though they were, the elites of the leading peoples had a fairly unified view of the officially recognized national minorities. They were universally perceived as intruders, catspaws of foreign empires, or renegades. This called for a policy that would rectify the historical injustice brought about by centuries of alien rule. It has several intertwined streaks. Firstly, in the field of education, the former assimilation had to be undone. Together with reducing the number of minority schools, it was tried to press as many minority children into Yugoslav schools. This was done by abolition of private schools, usually teaching German, Hungarian, Romanian, Bulgarian, Italian, or Greek languages, and by analysis of family names, with all children with Slavic sounding names having to attend schools in the state language, as it was called, regardless of the tongue they spoke at home. Since the authorities claimed the Minority Convention, granting minimum of national rights to ethnic minorities, was not valid in territories Serbia and Montenegro had acquired in the Balkan Wars, no schools for Albanians or Turks were opened, even though the existence of these minorities was not denied. What was denied was ethnic purity of the Albanians. Most of them allegedly had Serbian ancestors who had been converted to Islam and later on to Albanian nationality under pressure. However, it seems that the authorities did not believe they could re-Serbianize the Albanians through schools. After weak initial attempts, the Albanians were left to drown in sea of analphabetism. Another way of re-establishing ethnic majority in some regions was colonization of Slavic, predominantly Serbian settlers in the regions such as Kosovo, Macedonia, or the Vojvodina, where the non-Serbs made up majority population. This was done with multiple aims: to rectify the ethnic balance in the region, to satisfy land hunger of poor peasants, to break down the power of mostly foreign or large landowners, to secure the territory to loyal Slavic element, and to improve agriculture. It turned out that none of these goals were achieved. The ethnic makeup was changed only on local levels, without contributing significantly to the change of overall ethnic proportions. Land hunger was not appeased since not all landless peasants received land. Furthermore, new landless generations kept growing up, whereas those who did receive the land got too little of it. It was often of poor quality or had to be made arable first. The power of large landowners was only partly broken since the agrarian reform was only moderately implemented. In World War II, it turned out that the results of the colonization were undone within weeks after Yugoslavia's capitulation. Colonists were expelled and the territories changed hands again. Throughout the interwar period, poor and often unskilled colonists had to struggle with inarable land, lack of water, money, tools, and cattle, as well as with the enmity of the locals, belonging both to minorities and majorities. In the north, they also had to compete with agriculturally more skillful Germans, Slovaks, and Hungarians. Some were just too lazy to work, so they sold or leased their plots to members of ethnic minorities whom they were supposed to oust. Thus, the demise of great empires and creation of the kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes brought about great changes whose substance did not differ much from the previous period. Members of former relative majorities, Germans, Hungarians, Albanians, Turks, became now members of minorities, whereas former members of relative minorities, Southern Slavs, became members of the majority. However, that majority was divided from within and to a large extent fictional. All efforts to transform it into a real united entity failed, but this did not help members of real minorities. The Yugoslav policy towards the ethnic minorities remained restrictive at best and oppressive at worst. Improvements were introduced only sporadically and caused by reasons of party or foreign policy and not by conviction. To make things more complicated, no religious community had an absolute majority either. The Muslims, Protestants, and Jews were clearly in minority, but neither of the two great Christian churches, Orthodox and Roman Catholic, had a majority either. Each of these religious communities was divided along ethnic lines, complicating the situation further. It is no wonder that such ethnic and religious situation, where everyone was a minority, failed to produce a stable political system. Political parties were in general ethnically based, and they contributed little to the state unity. On the other hand, they usually failed to unite their own ethnic groups, so they contributed to their further fragmentation and the fragmentation of the whole country. All this was painfully obvious in April 1941, as the country disintegrated in just 11 days under the attack of the Axis powers and their allies. It was the communities who came out victorious from World War II, and who built, it was the communists who came out victorious from World War II and who built up ideological majority that held the country together for the next 4.5 decades. Once this ideological majority broke down, all sorts of old minorities resurfaced and the country broke up. Thank you.